So far, so good. This is still an experiment, folks. I mean, it's only the second time we've tried to do this. It went reasonably well 2 weeks ago. It'll even be better this time. We're ahead of where we were last time. So I'm happy to welcome you here on behalf of the Emeritus Center. Our president, Ed, is traveling. So it's just me you're stuck with. And I'm happy to welcome you today, and I'm happy to welcome our guest, Dr. Frankie Bailey. And I'd like to introduce her, and I know she has some screens to share and a little bit that she wants to talk to us about, and then questions about your book. Sounds good. Frankie Bailey is professor in the School of Criminal Justice, University of Albany. Her areas of research are crime history, crime and mass media, popular culture, and material culture. Her books include Out of the Woodpile, Black Characters in Crime and Detective Fiction, and African American Mystery Writers. She is a McCavity Award winner and Edgar Agatha Anthony nominee for nonfiction. She's also the recipient of a George N. Dove Award for contributions to the study of crime fiction. Her own mysteries feature Southern criminal justice professor, crime historian Lizzie Stewart, Albany Police Detective Hannah McCabe, and former World War II Army nurse Joe Radcliffe. Her short stories have appeared in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine and in recent anthologies Down to the River, Midnight Hour, and Monkey Business. She is working on a nonfiction book about dress, appearance, and perception, basis in American crime and justice, a historical thriller set in 1939, and the sixth Lizzie Stewart mystery. Frankie is past executive vice president of Mystery Writers of America and a past president of Sister of Crime National. Her housemates include Fergus, rambunctious but lovable Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, and Penelope, a tolerant, trilling Maine Coon Rescue. Dr. Bailey, thank you.
Thank you. Actually, thank you for that very nice introduction. And actually, Fergus was not very lovable last night. He was snoring. So if I'm yawning, it's because he sleeps in the same room and sometimes he won't turn over. And he, Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, they have that short face. And so sleeping on the wrong side, he's very loud. So anyway, if I'm yawning, it's not because of you, it's because of him. So I'm going to very quickly go through some slides talking about why I wrote The Red Queen Dies, and then just showing you the process of what I was doing in terms of how I thought about this. And then I'll just open it up to you. So I'm going to go through it quickly, so I can get to you and you can pose any questions you have. So you're probably wondering about this. Is that? Am I sharing? Yeah, okay. I'm not accustomed to looking at myself in, So, you're looking at the screen behind me, so I have to move over. Let me get over. Okay. So the whole idea of an alternate history, writing a book set in Albany and an alternate history, I have to explain how I came to do this, and then that will answer some of your questions. So I was talking to an editor at St. Martin's, and we were talking about, she said, "What are you working on?" And I gave her the wrong answer. I said, "Oh, I'm working on this book set in 1939. And she said, "Well, I don't really do historicals." And so I was riding back to Albany on the train. And I thought that was really stupid. You were talking to an editor from St. Martin's. You're one of the big five in terms of publishers, and you don't have a good answer. You give it a wrong answer. And so I got home, I came up with 3 possibilities about things I might want to do. And I was sort of looking at you, thinking about what she might be interested in there. And then I came up with 3 ideas. One involved a crime psychologist, the other was a PI, and then I was looking at I guess, Twilight Zone or something on television. And then I thought, well, why not a mystery set in the near future? And so I zipped all this off in an email, and I thought she was going to pick one of the first two, but she picked this third one. I knew nothing at all about writing sci-fi, nothing. Don't read it, don't know anything about it. And she said, I love that idea. And then I thought, well, I got to come up with the book now. And so I had no idea what it would be about. But I thought I would use Albany because I live in Albany, and I thought, well, Albany has this great history, and I could do something with that, and at least I would have that part covered. So I sort of sat down and began to think about this. What if, what if, as writers do when they're trying to come up with something. And so then I came up with this near future police procedural series set in Albany, New York. But I was studying it in the future because I didn't want to have, I wanted deniability. So I could say it's set, in 2020, 21. And this was 2017 when I was working on this. And that part worked out. But then by the time we got through with the process and the book was coming out, and I was working on the second book, we had a female mayor, which I had not counted on. I thought, I'm writing, setting this book in Albany, I can have this female mayor, and I can, say, well, of course this isn't a mayor, she's a woman. And then, we have a female mayor. And so I had to avoid her for, like the next 2 or 3 years. Really, I was invited to, things where I would go, I would say, I can't come, the mayor's gonna be there. And finally, I, was nominated, was named as an Albany literary legend, the Albany Public Library. And she was there and I couldn't dodge her. So now, luckily now I'm in an alternate universe because the future caught up with me while I was writing. And so now I'm actually in 2021. So it's the recent past in the book that started out in the near future. And so that's one of the reasons that sci-fi writers say create something, add something to any book so that if the future catches up with you, you can have this parallel universe or alternate universe. And so luckily I had done some research on how to do that. And so I built that into it. If you notice, we'll talk about that, alien, UFO, that was a part of my deniability. Of course we haven't had an alien yet. So, it started out well. So then in terms of deconstructing the process, I was thinking about this police procedural. I knew how to do a police procedural in principle because I do crime fiction research, and also I watch all of the crime dramas on television, going back to Hill Street Blues, if you remember that one. That is, if you want to know, a really good police procedural from a criminal justice point of view, that is really well done. It's set in an urban area. You have this, and if you notice, this talking across each other and all of the things they did there, very different from Law and Order, where they're working on one case. Hill Street Blues was closer to the truth than Law and Order. So I used that as my model, but also I done ride-alongs with female police officers and their partners. We were doing research in the city I cannot name, but it's in upstate New York. But because they had invited us in they had a grant and they wanted us to study stress among police officers, what stressed them out. And so they assigned me as the only woman on the project to do this ride along with female police officers and their partners. And so, I know something about that. I did some research on the near future. I joined the near future, or the future society that focuses on this as a society that actually looks at what's going to scenarios for the near future. I went to one of their very expensive conferences, and then I actually went back to look at Star Trek and some of the other shows to see what they did when they go in and they're creating this kind of alternate universe scenario. And then, of course, I had the real place. And I had done, Alice Green and I did some research for a book about Albany in the 1930s. But before that, I had done research looking at Albany going back to the past, because I talk about history in my class and I use Albany as one of the examples. So I had the background, and there was this really intriguing story that I wanted to tell. And you can guess what it was. You're about Abraham Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth. And so I decided I was going to have this woman, I was putting this together as I was going along. And so I was looking at my, bookcase, and there was Alice in Wonderland. Yeah. And I thought, well, I know there was a yellow brick road here in Albany. You know where it is, out in Delaware, as you're going towards, do you know where the state police have their horses? It's next to that dog run. It's the dog park adjacent to that. If you walk through that and cross over, there's a yellow brick road that's very faded, but it's still out there. We're famous for that, if you don't know. And so I wanted to use that. So that would have been the Wizard of Oz. But then I thought the Red Queen Dies works even better. And I didn't come up with that title. I had the Red Queen, but they wanted a shorter title, so they came up with something else. But I wanted to have someone who could come to Albany from the outside and be killed. And so I was down in New York City to see my agent, and I was thinking about the theater, and then I thought, well, why not have an actress who comes to Albany, and she's working on this play, and she gets killed, and then I could do kind of an Agatha Christie thing and add two more people who are going to be killed, and then it would be a question of whether it was all three somehow connected, or she just was very unlucky. So and of course, this cover, I wanted to mention the cover, because this cover, if you notice, the rabbit has, I didn't come up with the cover so I can say it's a great cover. The cover actually, people were talking, reviewing the cover, not my book, but the cover, because they said it was so simple and beautiful and well constructed and just very sly in terms of what he does there. So I was really pleased with the cover when it came along. But when I was thinking about, what I was going to be doing here, and I want to get myself out of that, but I don't want to. So I was looking at the year 2019, because I was working on this in 2016 and 2017. And I did some research looking at drugs, because I thought drugs would be a really interesting way to go here in terms of what might be happening in this Albany and country at this point. And so I was looking at, I had been reading something about soldiers coming back from the war traumatized. And this goes back to the Civil War. We have soldiers coming back from the Civil War, and they were given morphine and they come back drug addicted. The same kind of thing happens with every war. And so I was looking at some research about post-traumatic stress disorder and what a drug that they think might be useful in the near future for soldiers who come back. They're using it right now for victims of rape and sexual assaults and other things. But so I gave it a name, Lullaby, and then I put it out in the streets in my book. And there's some mention of this in terms of the woman who comes into the police station and can't remember what happened. And then Hannah's thinking about, what happens if we do this? And this is one of the questions. If you give victims of traumatic stress, victims of a crime, then when they go in to testify, they're not going to be able to do it. So it's a problem there in terms of how to deal with that. And then I was looking at Hannah, of course, is a biracial police detective whose father is white, mother was black, and of course the father is a retired editor of a newspaper that I don't give a name because it would be my guess. So in terms of this technology, I wanted to have the father as the keeper of the history of Albany. So he is the person she goes to when she needs to know something about the history. And of course, there's the newspaper archive, but he's a better source because he's right there and in the house and they can talk about it. So one of the things you want to do when you're creating a series or when you're writing a book, particularly a series, you want to give the detective someone to talk to, someone to brainstorm with. So that goes back to Edgar Allan Poe. And then Sherlock Holmes. Edgar Allan Poe is before, he has a detective before Sherlock Holmes, they should probably know. And so going back to his unnamed Watson, his narrator, that idea that you always give the detective, even if that detective is a loner, someone that he's bouncing things off of. And ideally a friend or your partner or spouse or someone who's going to be around a lot. And so I was looking at the advanced technology and this idea of a citywide surveillance program. Going back to London, London was the first to do this, but almost every major city and even smaller cities now have surveillance. So you can't drive any place, and I was talking to the public information officer about this, but there's almost no place you can drive in Albany even now and not be caught on camera. Whether it's the city's camera or whether it's a bank or a store. So this becomes really important in terms of how my detectives move around. And one of the things I had to figure out is how I knock out that surveillance camera, because if you're going to kill people, you don't want them caught on. I mean, that sort of solves the crime too easily. Oddly enough, during the pandemic, you could get away with killing someone and not be identified because people were wearing masks. And that was, in most cities, including Albany, you're not supposed to wear masks if you're of a certain age and only certain days, because Halloween is one of those times. But in public places, covering your face, particularly when you're going to banks and other things, it's not a good idea. So I needed to come up with something, and luckily, unluckily for us, but in the near future, we're going to be getting so many things streaming through the skies in the universe that's going to be knocking out your reception with the climate change and everything else. So I built that into what I was writing, this idea that the technology is unreliable, particularly in Albany, because Albany is a good place to have this happen because we have a lot of old buildings. We have if you, in any storm, we're likely to get knocked out in one way or another. I don't know about your Wi-Fi, but my Wi-Fi often goes down during storms. So I built that idea into it. And then this idea of this Broadway actress, and is she a part of this pattern of 3 people being killed? If you don't know, if you have 3 or more people killed, or 4 people, according to some specialists, but usually for the FBI, it's between 3 and 4, depending on what's going on. But 3 or 4 people being killed by an unknown killer in the same way, in similar ways, would suggest it's a serial killer. And they usually, at that point, begin to look for the signature of the serial killer. 2 people don't count as a serial killer. So that's why I needed 3, at least 3. And so then you notice I marked through September. This is when I was writing this, I did that to remind myself. I started out with studying the story in September, but then the year I was writing it in October, it was still hot. And so I thought, climate change, by the time this comes out, I should probably say November. But I thought, but now, now it's November when I'm working on something where Hannah and Mike Baxter are going to show up as a part of the 1939 book I'm working on, because they're going to be in 2020 and then they're going to find a murder that's linked to 1939. So now I'm setting that in November or later in terms of what I'm looking at with them. And I'm using, here I was using Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz, because I wanted to bring in that kind of, because I like Alice in Wonderland and I saw, but also because I had this idea that I could make my sci-fi, since I don't write sci-fi, don't know a lot about it. If I followed Alice in Wonderland and drew from that in terms of what I was doing. So if you remember, particularly with the drug, there's that scene, also is drawing on the Wizard of Oz. Remember when you got Dorothy and they're going through the poppy field? So the idea of the poppy field comes up, and that's that reference. But with Alice in Wonderland, I was thinking about the cat, the Cheshire Cat, and all of the animals there, and sort of making the characters sort of like that, at least in my mind. And then, of course, the Lincoln assassination. How many people knew about that already? Yeah. That is a true story. Everything historical about Albany in this book and the next, What the Fly Saw, all is true in terms of what happened. I don't fictionalize any of that. But this is, as you read, if you finish reading, this was Abraham Lincoln, the Pinkerton Detective Agency that protected him as he was going to his inauguration. And they rerouted him the long way around to get him to the inauguration. Do you know about Pinkerton? This was the private eyes coming out of Chicago. And they are the people, if you watch Westerns and the train comes in and they ride out on horse and they take out a horseback and take out after the posse. So in the West, they were going after Western outlaws. And then they came back east after the West was settled, and they were involved with strike breakers, the Molly Maguires. So their reputation is mixed, but they're still around. You can, still doing 100 years plus later. So they were protecting Lincoln when he was coming to New York, and the long way around the first time, but then he comes back, and on the same day that Lincoln is here, John Wilkes Booth is here, and he's performing in a play, and then he comes back and with his girlfriend, his lover, and they're the same because they're traveling players as they were at the time, and they get into an argument, and they're both drinking, and she tries to kill him. She stabs him. He survives, too bad, but he does. And then, of course, he's there when, Lincoln, there to assassinate Lincoln. And then, of course, the really chilling part is that when you look at what happened there, you got this major and his fiance, and they're in the box with the Lincolns, and the major is almost killed. And then later on, he and the fiance get married, and they're in Germany, and he ends up stabbing her, and so a really bad scene. And then you got the hat maker, the hat going back to the Alice in Wonderland thing with the hat, the Mad Hatter. We got one in Troy, and because it's the mercury from the hat making that was and so he ends up being a part of the posse going after John Wilkes Booth, and actually is responsible for killing him after being told not to shoot. So all of that kind of chilling thing going back to Lincoln, and I wanted to work that in. And of course, I mentioned now the problem. I just want to mention the problem with writing a near future novel. I didn't know the problem until I got an agent after I got the contract. The editor and I worked out the contract, and I had a literary lawyer, and then I went and got an agent after that. And he said later, well, the problem is that mystery readers often don't read sci-fi, and sci-fi readers don't read mysteries. And if you get someone who reads both, you're lucky. And so my problem was, when I started to do this, was that I was aiming for the mystery readers who were reluctant to go to sci-fi. The sci-fi readers were the fantasy readers actually were very happy with this. The mystery readers, so it became, one of those issues. Some of them said, I finally read it. I didn't think it was going to. I like Lizzie. I didn't want you to write this. I wanted another Lizzie, and you wrote this. So I had two things going on there. And I mentioned, I got the problem of the present catching up with the future, but I resolved that one. And then the whole issue of how you create an alternate universe, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And I'll talk about that quickly. But this is how I started my alternate universe. And you notice it's October, late October, it's the mid-90s. And I don't know if you can actually imagine what I'm talking about with this, but it was the idea of having something up on the board, on the wall, where you can actually view things on the wall. And I call it the Wake Up News. And this is sort of the BBC version of the news, where no one is, there, being an anchor person who's a celebrity or anything, just this very basic report. And some people actually jumped right over this and got to the middle of the book, and these are the mystery readers. They sort of skipped this, and then they said, well, yeah, I got to this point, I was wondering, what is this? I mean, what is this orb thing? And why, I don't understand what's going on. And then one woman actually emailed me and corrected me about a date I used. It was something like, oh, it was Dewey winning the election or something. And she said, well, I'm sorry, but don't you know? And I had to write back and say, yeah, I know what. And I had to explain to her what it was, because she just jumped right on over it. But I thought if I put this on the first page, the first paragraph, they would get this. I mean, UFO, boomer, but no. The fantasy people, the sci-fi people got it. They didn't. So that was my first chapter. That was the reason I started there. And then, of course, this is what I imagined this would look like if I tilted this on the side, because it always looks like a UFO to me when I drive into the city. And you're sort of looking at it like that. And so, the Empire State Plaza, I went down and did photographs. I always go to the scene to get some idea of what it looks like. Of course, I knew what it looked like in Albany, but I wanted to just go back and see that. So let me stop this and go to the other screen if I can get to it. So let me just very quickly tell you a bit about the process, and then I'll open it up to questions. Oh. Sorry, wrong one. I didn't lose it. Stop sharing. Where'd it go? I may have lost that. Oh, well. I think I did lose it someplace. Let's see. What did I do? It fell away. Let's see if I can get to PowerPoint here. I don't know what I did. I did
close the other file.
Let's see.
Maybe go to open a new file.
Yeah, it was down there and it's gone. But anyway,
Let's see if we can find it.
I'll just keep talking when you get this, because I get my notes. So anyway, I want to just say something about what I did in terms of the process. So I will keep talking.
What's the name of the file you were?
It is the Rule of the Red Queen Dies. It's probably on the Albany. Go to, yeah, I think that looks like
This one here?
Let's see. I'll go to the other beside it. We're back at the same one.
This is the same one?
Yeah.
So we want to get out of that one?
Yeah, we do. Let's see.
Albany World of Red Queen?
Yeah, that's it. Great.
We're back.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to just talk about this real fast and then I'll get to the other thing. So I just want to show you what I do in terms of how I go
Oh, we
about
need
doing.
to share the screen again. I think.
I don't want to lose it, so I'll let you share it before I lose it.
Oh, that's interesting. It's not showing it at all now.
Yeah, that was the problem. Sorry.
Try one more time.
Can you drag it to the desktop? That's what I've used.
Now maybe if you just click on share, it should be
Oh, that's what I,
good before.
okay, there it is.
Okay, great.
There you go.
Thanks. Can I? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to talk a bit about what I was looking at when I was planning this. So I started with this idea of 2019 and the idea of, in the near future, 2 or 3 years, the world was going to be on the brink of a lot of bad things happening, which is not the happiest thought, but since I was dealing with reality there. So I'm looking at, I was thinking of the UFO and its impact on people in my near future, that it would be something like the impact of, say, 9/11, this kind of very traumatic thing where the UFO is out there and it goes away and you never know when it's coming back again, but you try to go on with your life. And so this is my background for what I'm thinking about with Hannah and Mike and what's going on in their lives in this. And there's a kind of, after a while, you can only be tense up so long and then you relax. But every anniversary, you got these survivalists and they're out there and they're trying to, thinking the UFO is coming back. And so it's never completely out of anyone's mind. And so there's this whole idea of extinction or survival that's in the background here. Because I want to deal with some serious issues. I deal with social issues in my mysteries, and I can't help doing that because I think about them a lot as a criminal justice person. So I'm looking at things, and as I was looking at this, I was looking at what was going to be happening in the near future, and before because I was writing in advance of some of these things, I was thinking about New York regulating the sale of marijuana, eco-terrorism, and the problem that was going to be. I was thinking about hate crimes on the rise. Oddly enough, well, I'll tell you about Howard Miller in a minute. So I was looking at immigrants coming into the area, what was going to happen with that. And then I was thinking about Hispanics and the fact that they were a very fast growing population and, gaining more political clout in terms of what was going on. And also before the convention center because that was being discussed. I thought it would give us one because we're the BochiCon, the International Mystery Conference here, and it was in the Empire State Plaza, and no one was happy because they were walking up the hill from the hotel, and the plaza is not a warm and fuzzy place for a conference. And so I gave us the convention center. Being ahead of the curve here, I feel I was doing good there. And then I was thinking about this theme of what was going to be happening in the 21st century. So I went back to 1939, the 1939 World's Fair, when they were thinking about the world of tomorrow, and I drew from that because they had robots and other things, and television debuted there, and a lot of things were going on. And I was thinking, in terms of environment, we have this back to nature movement. In fact, when I went in to see my editor, she had a nonfiction writer who had given her a book about vertical gardens. So that's why I added that, because she had already said, put this in the book. So, and then I was thinking about demonstrations and how people would be responding. And so if you notice, the weapon that they're using, the gun that the police officers are using is based on a future gun, a gun that's already out there, but most departments don't have it yet. So that was, and then I was looking at cars, and I was thinking, because back in 1939, they were predicting we would have flying cars by now, and we do, but no one really has them. They're out there in the prototype. So I was thinking hybrid or electric, and then there is, and again, I was looking at the near future in terms of that car. If you remember, when they go to pick up the police car, it goes, there are garages in New Jersey and other places right now where the cars actually do that. You push a button and the car comes down to you. And so I wanted to do that. I thought gasoline would be high, and so I predicted $8. Maybe we don't want to get there, but and then I was thinking about police officers and how they would be going about doing what they're doing. In the 19th century, into the early 20th century, they were walking a beat. And I was thinking, based on what some of my police scholar colleagues talk about, that we might be back there again. But I was also thinking about those undetectable cameras that they would have. And of course, they would be wearing the camera. And right now, anywhere in Albany, and well, in certain places in Albany, particularly Arbor Hill, there's technology that allows them to detect where a gunshot was fired. So I put that in, you can hear it all over the city in my particular version of this. And so then I wanted to have everything I could find in terms of what would be going on in terms of policing by then. Facial recognition. I just returned from England, from Dublin, and then to England, and now you're doing the facial recognition for your passport. So, and that's being used for so many things that now you just walk up to a door. If you saw the Minority Report, the movie, that whole idea of eyeballs and things being used for recognition. But I wanted my pedestrians and Hannah and other folks to just be walking past the stores in a cool way and have people, calling someone calling out to them about the sales, like in the Minority Report. And I also I thought that would be a good way of getting people's names out there, because it would say their names and then you would know who they are. So I haven't used that much lately, but if you notice, McCabe stopped to buy a muffin at the bakery, and she goes up to the register and she's already ordered on her arm, which is as someone said, it's a smart form of phone on high tech, so adding a bit more high tech to that. So, and then I was looking at, I mentioned picking up the car and but the collision warning, my car has it, and yours probably does as well by now. So it's standard. I wanted to get in at Mike Baxter Loves Cars because that's going to be important later for something else I'm going to be doing. And in the first book you're writing, you have to establish most of what you want to be known about the character, because readers don't really like it if you go back and add later. I mean, if I had said Hannah's father has a black belt and that didn't come up until the third book, they would say, well, you just put that in now because you need it. So I tried to think of everything I might need. And this whole idea of the organized crime and black market, a lot of problems with that. I mentioned the memory drug that our woman who comes into the police station has. Organized crime and identity theft. This is a big problem. Pornography, one of the issues, I was going to use that in the next book, and that's why I brought it up in this book just in passing. Not the pornography part, but the virtual child part. One of the issues about virtual victims, whoever they are, there is this whole thing right now in terms of technology where people are committing crimes against virtual victims. And the question is whether they can be, so for example, if you have someone who sets up something, sells tickets for entry and then tortures someone online or in cyberspace, whether or not that person can be punished. What is the crime if you kill someone who is virtual? Or if you kidnap someone who's virtual. I mean, the technology is ahead of the laws. We don't really have something that covers that unless you can get someone under some other version of this. But if you have an avatar and you kill the avatar, unless it's a video game or something else, if I want to kill you and I have an avatar of you and then I say, I shoot the avatar and then I say, I just kill you online. I mean, do you have any recourse about that? So it's grave robbing, I wanted to mention because this goes back to the 19th century, with Burke and Hare, the whole idea of grave robbing, because at the time there were no, the medical schools needed bodies and they couldn't get bodies easily. And so they were buying bodies from grave robbers. And so I wanted to look at this in terms of urban legend. And so I put that in. And not all of this ended up in the book, but I had this down as things I needed to remember to work in some way, particularly when Edgar Allan Poe came up. So, and let's see, what else do we, so climate change, I mentioned, you notice that they have special clothing that is, that they use for your sun, wind, everything. I was looking at what we will have in the near future in terms of being able to do that. And I, of course, built the heat wave in. One of the problems with the body, and there's a man named Dr. Doug Lowell. He's a practicing neurosurgeon, and he's also a mystery writer, and he has a podcast. I don't know when a man sleeps, but you write him if you're he helps us kill people. I should put it that way. If you write Dr. Doug and you say, I need to do so and so, and how do I do it? He will tell you. And so I'd email him, and I wanted to know about how long the body could be out there and what the conditions needed to be that would make it difficult for the medical examiner to reach a time of death and other conclusions. And so he talked me through the necessary things with this. He just told me recently, and we talked also about the drug that they would be using. And just the other, recently he told me about how to poison someone with something, but I mean, he doesn't, provide this information to there's a woman who it's called the Poison Lady, and she works as a forensic pathologist, and she comes to conferences and people can ask her about how to kill people with poisons. So, yeah, they're really very useful when you're trying to do this. I said that the boarding house, this is my subplot, the other subplot that was going on with the other two detectives, because now we do have boarding houses again, because people are renting and they can't afford apartments. This goes back to the 19th century, of course, with the boarding houses and before that. And so I wanted to have another pair of detectives. And so I set them up. If you notice, Pettigrew has the collection of sports figures. That's because I went to the home of a couple. They invited me over, and the husband had all of the sports figures in these beautiful uniforms, not play toys, but collector's items. And so I asked if I could use that in the book. And so that's how that came up. And let's see, okay, boarding house. And the food supply, I mentioned the virtual garden there. And then, of course, I wanted to look at live theater. So, the idea, this took me back to Star Trek again and some of the sci-fi where you have, and of course, now they're doing it with musicians as well, with the Michael Jackson thing, and since, which is kind of creepy, but if you look at that, it's hard to tell, is this real or hologram? So I was looking also at the threats that are out there in terms of what might be coming up. Terrorist attacks, public security fallout shelters. Going back to the 1950s, the technology, there's some places in Albany and other cities where houses still have a fallout shelter. Because they were building them in the 1950s. You could get a blueprint from Sears and Roebuck and build your own fallout shelter or your own underground shelter in case of nuclear war when they thought it was survivable at the time. And it is, but you probably don't want to. And then I've got my right-wing politician. Believe it or not, this was before Donald Trump. So now I've got Howard Miller out there, and he's going to turn up in what I'm doing. He's been on his way to Albany for 2 books, and he's finally going to turn up because I need him for the 1939 thing. Because my 1939 book involves a conspiracy that's going to involve a time capsule that's going to be found here in Albany when Howard Miller and the Democrat and the Republican are all on their way to Albany. And the question is whether or not someone's going to try to assassinate one of them. So, and then, this whole idea of this grassroots movement. And right now, in terms of what's going on with the immigration, I was looking at that issue of what's happening in various countries. And how that impacts the United States, because I want to get all that in. And then I mentioned the space aliens, Twilight Zone, always in terms of what was going on. Humans and science. The Red Queen, this has nothing to do with Alice in Wonderland, in case you ever come across this. This is about evolution and species and adjusting and mutations and how they do this. And so I wanted to put that in case I wanted to come back and use it for something. But that has nothing to do with, except for the name. And I think, this is the last thing. So I wanted to look at criminal justice and what was going on with that. So the whole idea of security guards, and because right now there are more private security guards, private security, private police than actually public police. And we're going to find more and more of that as we go on. So anyway, that is the background, and I'm happy to take questions about anything. Went through that fast. I hope you follow me.
We're gonna use the mics. Thanks for trying to record this. It makes it so much more difficult. But I just want to say it was amazing to hear the thinking that went into this book and to planning future books and the conventions. And it was great. So please.
Yeah, thanks.
I just want to know, just in reference to what you just said, so as you were writing this book, are you actually also thinking several books ahead in order to?
You have to do it with a series. If it's a standalone, you can, there are people who are called plotters, and then there are people who write by the seat of their pants, and I'm a plotter, so I always think. But with a series, you really have to do that, because you have to get anything important about the character, you have to get that in the first book, or at least say, make a reference to something that might be coming up. So yeah, when you go in and you're pitching a series to an editor or agent, they want you to have thought ahead 2 or 3 books at least. So you and have a character arc. So in my Lizzie Stewart book, for example, the character arc there involves her missing mother, who she finds in book 5 and who's going to turn up again in book 6 and so on. With Hannah, there is a secret about her partner. And there's also the dog and the other things.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I get to a bit more about that in book 2, What the Fly Saw, and then but it doesn't really because it involves Howard Miller, so it doesn't actually all come together until hopefully I get that 3rd book done, which my agent's waiting for. So it is, but I'll tell you what it is if you really want to know. Okay.
That sort of led to the second question, which is how careful are you when you're writing in a series and you're several books in, how careful are you about spoilers? Presuming that people may not read the series in order.
I'm careful about because in the series, usually the murder's solved, the murder of that book is solved, but I'm careful not to give away anything about the characters themselves, other than, with Lizzie and the Lizzie Stewart series, obviously, if you read book 4 or 5 and she's already engaged to John Quinn, you sort of know how that turned out. But I don't give away that much about her mother or anything else that has not been resolved up to that point. That is really important. But the characters themselves, it's a really tricky thing, because some people do pick up the book, some people might have picked up book 4 where Becca appears and they start reading and then they go back and read it. And but I need to say enough, and so the book can be a standalone book and they can pick it up and read it at any time, but at least tell them enough so that I brought them up to speed about the characters. And that's really tricky, because people have been reading the series all along, don't want to sit through while I say, and Becca is the mother and Becca disappeared and all of that. And so you have to figure out how to work that in without boring the people who already know. So it's, that's the trickiest part of it.
Actually, the first thing I should say is that I'm one of those weird people who reads a lot of science fiction and a lot of mystery fiction. I probably have 30 or 40 shelves of both at home.
That's very good.
One known more as a science fiction writer than as a mystery writer, who wrote it just about every possible category you can think of, was Isaac Asimov. And several of his robot novels are about a robot detective.
Yeah, he's one of the few sci-fi writers I have read.
Well, there are others who write general necessity, but that wasn't really what I only wanted to mention Asimov here. But also your comment about that people who start in the middle of a series. I like reading series fiction of either type. I always want to start with the first one.
Me too.
Because I don't want to get caught in the middle there. Oh, but I already know that, and I shouldn't know that. And now there was one other thing I wanted to say, and now I've forgotten what it was. So maybe I'll come back.
But I agree with you. I like to follow the character arc.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing I wanted to comment on was that this was an interesting. Well, actually, prior to that, I liked this book. This first book of yours I've read, and I've already picked up the one. What's the title? The second one.
What the Fly Saw.
What the Fly Saw. I've already picked that one up, and I'm ready to start reading it.
Oh, thank you.
So you hooked me. What I wanted to comment on was that in the first book, I was more taken by most of the detective part of the story than by the science fiction part of the story. Although a lot of the stuff that were specifically related to the actions as detectives, the police force, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
I understood. I didn't really get much out of about was it Harold Miller or Howard Miller?
Howard Miller.
Howard Miller, or the UFOs and that sort of thing.
And Howard Miller is, because he's barely mentioned other than, because I didn't know the Donald Trump thing was gonna
Oh,
happen.
yeah.
Uh,
Well,
so,
what actually explain some things to me that actually make it more meaningful to me as to why they were included, because especially Howard Miller
right,
becomes more important apparently than in the second book and perhaps even in the third book. I don't know.
yeah, because at this point in the first book, yeah, McCabe doesn't realize that he's going to impact her family. And in the second book, you begin to realize that when she runs into trouble because of other things that are happening with her brother. But the third book, or 1939, he's
Yeah.
on his way to Albany. So I had to put him out there, but I didn't want to deal with him.
Well, in any case, I really like the book. And I'll be
Thank
reading
you.
the next one.
Thank you.
What else? Frankie, I read your second book first,
What the fly saw.
and I didn't understand a whole lot of it. And then as I'm reading this book, it's like, oh, okay. You know, and I
If you
started
read
reading-
the second, you probably didn't understand the McCabe Baxter thing and what Baxter is
I
up
knew there
to.
was something there, but-
Yep.
and can't wait to read the second one again. But I laughed out loud. My wife said, what are you reading? And I said, well, I'm doing an audiobook, so I have what? With my earphones on, but she said, it must be something very interesting. And I said, yeah, Frankie finished. I know exactly what happened in this book. It's all done. And now Frankie has got a whole other section to it. And she's answering questions that I never thought I had for the first book. And she's laying out all kinds of nifty stuff for next time, I can tell. It was great. It was a great romp and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I love the orb. It got me right in the beginning. I said, what, the orb? And I realized what the orb was after a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I had to give it a name because my editor said, well, what is the name of this thing? And so I Reach Beyond is,
It hit me because I started reading some alternative history by Harry Turtledove.
Oh, yeah. he's a lot of-
And he does a lot of fantasy and does alternate history, and he does an extremely great idea. I mean, he's very truthful to real history, but he does a nice little turn on it. Like in the First World War, they're talking about this brand new ultimate war machine called the barrel. I'm thinking, a barrel, what? No, and if you didn't call it a tank, what would you call it? So.
yeah, that was,
The word grabbed me and I said,
because I didn't know, I didn't want to call it something we call it now, so I had to come up with a name.
sure. So thank
But
you.
yeah, I'm glad you liked, because I did some research on funeral homes and funeral directors and how you embalm someone. So that was sort of interesting to do that research. It was kind of grisly, but it was, yeah.
Well, I just remember what you teach,
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I can eat through most things.
Yes.
Just really briefly, I read a lot of mysteries. Right now I'm on a British Mystery Jag, but all my whole life I've read.
I just returned from the Agatha Christie Festival.
Well, but there is an American writer, and this is not the author's actual name, but J.G. Robb
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
does a sort of
Hmm.
alternative history for the immediate future.
Yeah.
So there's something a little reminiscent in what you're doing with what she's doing. I didn't know if you were.
Yeah, I look at it, I've seen her, in panels at conferences, but I have 2 or 3 of her books, but I was trying to get into them, but because I Thank you. But yeah, I haven't been able, it's not because she's a bad writer. I mean, writes under other pseudonyms and she's really good, but I just couldn't get into.
She has these characters that are over the top, outrageously beautiful, wealthy, powerful, yada, yada, yada.
Maybe that was the problem I was having because my people are just sort of people.
Well, understate, an actor who underplays things is more dramatic, right?
And I would have a hard time writing someone who's incredibly beautiful or incredible. I don't know, people. I mean, I know ordinary people. I know attractive people. I don't know incredibly beautiful, wealthy. I thought I was pushing and having a billionaire in my book here, but I needed someone because I wanted the 1939, flying saucer kind of thing. I wanted someone who would have balloon or something and it's always good to have someone with money around, in the book someplace. Yeah. I thought, 1939, they thought it would be really cool to do that. But thank you so much. This was great.
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Spending the time with us. And
My pleasure.
Your skill. I loved it. Yeah, I have not read any of yours until I read this one.
Oh.
And I thought it's great. So thank you.
Oh, and I forgot to mention, of course, the Great Dane is because of you, Albany.
Oh, yeah.
And so I always put animals in my books. Okay, well, I am going to.
I went to Google Maps more than I wanted to while I was reading it too.
If this were a British book, I would have had a map and put all my characters up there by name so you could remember.
Well, that comes after book 4, doesn't it?
Well, it does become a problem because some people, if you have a recurring character and they haven't read the book or read the book in a while, then they forget people. So you have to remind people, like Miss Alice and my Lizzie, she owns a cafe. I mean, things like that are your memory nudgers, so you remember.
What's the
things.
first book in that series? So I don't screw up again.
That's Favorite Child.
Okay.
But that was set in Cornwall, England. The first one set in the United States is Dead Man's Army.
Okay.
But those are being reissued. Thank you.
Thank you. England's not a problem. We've got the Acorn channel on our TV now, and that's got all the British.
Oh, yeah.
You should get
Oh,
rid
yeah.
of
And well, we just got that one now because there was somebody that was in.
Yeah. Who are you reading in British? Which are you
I'm
reading?
all over the map of British. I tend to prefer British movies to seasonal,
Oh, me too. I love those on PBS.
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
I like
in
the
the book.
fact that, because they're not allowed to carry weapons, they have to have that special armed
Right.
Yeah.
unit. Then I think you get a lot more of the process, and you get a lot more character development and a lot less of, the way to solve the problem is to do a car chase and, blow everybody away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very civilized film.
My favorite writer of British mysteries is in fact not even British. It's Elizabeth George.
Yeah, I thought you- I knew
They're
you
both
said
in
that.
there.
But there are a whole bunch of others, Ian Cleves.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, I'm not
She
coming.
got,
to me right now.
I think she didn't, she started a new series, I know that.
Well, yeah, she, some of the stuff has been on PBS, the Vera stuff.
Vera.
Oh,
And
Vera's great.
and there's another series that she started.
We just started watching Shetland.
Oh, that,
It's great.
oh,
Yeah.
well, start from the beginning,
Yeah,
go
start
from
from
the
the
very
beginning.
first year.
Yeah.
And don't watch this year's stuff until you've watched all the
Yeah,
others.
don't
How
do
many
it.
years
Don't-
are
don't
they
have to-
that you started too?
7,
Oh, 7.
well, 7 with, who's the actor who does Jimmy Paris.
Henshaw, Doug Henshaw.
Doug Pinchel is leaving after this last
Yeah.
season.
That's
They plan to continue the series, but he's leaving the show.
I watched 6 seasons of The Sopranos
Mhm.
in a week because I'm working on a game and movies book. And yeah, I think it'll be easier to watch that than The Sopranos. So yeah, that was really.
I've been watching all of the, I never actually liked the Inspector Morse book.
Endeavor, right?
Oh, Endeavor, I
Endeavor's-
love Endeavor.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
And I like, Inspector Lewis more than I like Inspector Morse. And there's also a series that I just rewatched all of, was Foils War.
Oh, boy.
Oh, that, I
Those
love
are all
that.
really-
Well, my sister and I watched these things together, so I went through all of Endeavor. And I've gone through all of Lewis, and then I suggested to her, why don't we go back and rewatch Morse?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see that, now you have sort of backstory for Morse and how he got to be
Yes.
the way he is.
Yes.
Very unlikable.
There's also a Scottish detective, I can remember the author, Ian Rankin,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Rebus.
Rebus, yeah. Midsummer Murders, do you watch that at all?
All the time.
Uh,
The most dangerous place in the world, Midsummer.
Oh, yeah,
But it's easy, if you survive the first 5 minutes, you're set.
yeah. Oh, and it's fascinating watching them on BritBox or Acorn and that sort of thing, because you get all the trivia information and what other stuff these people have been in. It's amazing how many British actors have been in all the Star Wars or all the Harry Potter movies and
There
things
were
like
only
that.
really 20 actors in Britain.
Yeah, yes.